Hey guys, no video for our How to Do Stuff in Japan playlist and our mini-series on being married to a Japanese person. What originally encouraged us to start making videos on this topic was the fact that we receive emails regularly from people who are in relationships with Japanese people and who are struggling in those relationships. So that is what's triggered this one as well. And to be honest, the reason we started making these, two reasons. One is to sort of maybe try and help the people who are in relationships who are struggling, but also, to be honest, the other reason was to just straight out let people know what it can be like to make some people think twice, because the reality is that in most cases relationships between non-Japanese people and Japanese people fail, and that's what we hear all the time. That's what we hear all the time. And if you live in Japan long term, the relationships that you know of between non-Japanese people and Japanese people that are successful and happy, and those that fail, there's no comparison. You know, the majority fail. And to be, we've got to be honest about this. There's no point in trying to pretend otherwise, because that's not doing anybody any favors. And usually what happens is, if there's no children involved, they end up just walking away from each other. So often when there is children involved, they will as well, but the children thing adds a different complication to it, of course, because, you know, both people want to continue to live with the kids, so that makes more pressure to stay together, doesn't it? So that's what's triggered this video as well. We received another email this week from somebody, a non-Japanese guy who's been married to a Japanese lady for about 10 years, and they've got a couple of kids, and they're really struggling. They're really struggling. And again, the kids means that both people want to stay with the kids, which means that you end up wanting to stay together, even if you're not enjoying it, because you want to be with your kids, which is fair enough. The other thing is too that quite often the kids can be a catalyst to the problem. The kids can be bring some other problems up, because there are differences in the way Japanese people raise kids and how people from some other cultures raise kids, and that can raise problems in itself. So quite often the non-Japanese people look at the way the Japanese people deal with it and think that they're not being compassionate enough, and they're being too strict or too ruthless or whatever, and that raises other problems as well. So in the case of this guy, he said that the communication that, hang on, let me check what he said. He said, oh, she seems reluctant to communicate, and there's no doubt about it. I mean, we've talked about this before. In a lot of our cultures, in a lot of societies, we consider that talking about your problems is a good way to help resolve them, or to resolve our feelings about them, and that talking about our problems is a positive, worthwhile thing to do. Whereas most Japanese people don't see it that way. Most Japanese people see it that if you talk about your problems, that is highlighting them and making them more of an issue. If there's a problem and you don't talk about it and you ignore it, that means that problem has less effect and less power, doesn't it? Because you're not looking at it and you're not talking about it. That's the way they see it. So the way they see it is, if you start talking about some problem, and this goes for not just husbands and wives and girlfriends and boyfriends, but this goes with anybody. You know, Japanese people very rarely, you know, in a lot of our societies, we think talking to our partner about our problems, or talking to our friends or our family members, or talking to people, co-workers or people about our problems, you know, we see it as being a positive thing, whereas they just see it as being a burden on other people. You know, if you talk to someone about your problems, that just makes that person that you're talking to feel bad. They see it that if you raise a problem with somebody who you have the problem with, that's just bringing it up. They still think, most Japanese people still think that if you just ignore the problem, that's the best way to deal with it, and then it's not an issue. If you ignore it, you don't talk about it, you pretend it doesn't exist, then it's not an issue. So then what happens is, if a Japanese person ends up in a relationship with a Westerner, and the Westerner keeps raising the problem, you know, the first time you raise it, they're going to be going, why are you talking about this? You're making a problem. That's the way they see it. That's the way they feel about it. And we've got to remember that this is the most Japanese people have been brought up to believe all this, and everybody they know believes all this. And so to them, this is perfectly normal and this is the way it is. And trying to convince them otherwise is usually a waste of time, because it's so deep-seated. In the same way in most of us, it's deep-seated that discussing problems and working through problems is the solution. It's deep-seated in them that it's a bad thing to do, that you don't talk about it. You just, the gambadu is what they say, just keep trying your best and don't talk about it. You know, don't talk about it, just keep trying your best and endure whatever it is that's making you unhappy. Don't be talking about it. So when you raise an issue with your partner and say, look, I'm not happy about this, they'll be going, what's your problem? Why are you complaining to me about this thing, right? And then, of course, it won't get resolved. What sometimes happens, and this guy said, it ends up blowing up. The conversation immediately turns into an argument. He said, well, that's what happens, is that they're going, why are you hassling me with this? Why are you talking about this? And then so it ends up in an argument, which means that it doesn't get resolved, which means to a lot of us, that means that issue continues to eat away at us, and then eventually we raise it again. And from our point of view, we're raising it again because we want to resolve it. But from the Japanese person's point of view, why are you raising this again? You know, last time you brought this issue up, we ended up having a big argument, and here you are raising this issue again. That's the way they see it. It's like, you know, you're doing it again. You're doing that same stupid thing again. So that's the way they see it. Let me just see what else he said. Yeah, she seems to think that anything he says is interpreted as a personal attack. Yeah, the way they see it is that you're complaining to them about this thing, and that you know, you're attacking them and complaining to them about this thing that you're not happy about. Look, it's really difficult, guys. A few things that might help. One is to remember that these guys are usually, Japanese people are usually coming from a totally different life experience from what we are. What they've experienced in their lives and what we've experienced, and the way we see this issue about discussing problems are totally different. And that in her mind, she's perfectly normal. You know, the way that she sees this issue is perfectly normal, and that we're the one that is a mystery, that she can't understand why we keep bringing up these problems, right? Because the Japanese goal is all about harmony. It's all about maintaining harmony. When you keep talking about things that are upsetting the harmony, you're you know, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. So we need to keep this in mind, that this is where they're coming from, and sometimes we get the impression with our Japanese partners or our Japanese friends that when we talk about stuff like this, you know, you can have big, deep and meaningful discussions with Japanese people about this on a purely philosophical level. That Western people like to talk about their problems because we think that it makes everything better, that we can work through problems and resolve them. And Japanese people say, oh, that's interesting. And you can quote all sorts of, you know, professors and doctors and psychologists and books, and you can talk about all these things, and Japanese people will often sit there and go, oh, that's interesting, yeah, that's interesting, oh, yes, you know. And you can point out that in the past, in a lot of our cultures in the past, we never talked about problems, but you know, now we've found that by talking about them, working them through, it resolves them. And they'll sit there and go, oh, that's really interesting, that sounds good, and they'll totally convince you that they think it's a great idea. And you can get your partners will often do this too. And yet, when you actually try and do it, they'll lose their minds. And some of you might remember I made a video a long time ago and talked about a guy that did this. A guy that I knew that we talked about this, and he used to talk about how Westerners are really good at understanding how to communicate and work through their problems. And he talked about this, about how great it is that Westerners are honest about what they think and that sort of thing. And you might recall, same guy called up once and said, how you going? And I said to him, I've had a shocking day. I went down to the city hall and they drove me crazy, and this happened and that happened. And he went dead silent. And I said, are you there? And he exploded and said, what do you want me to do about it? Right? Because he couldn't cope. He could not cope with the fact that I was telling him that I'd had a bad day. Because Japanese people don't do that. So, you know, that wasn't some deep relationship we had. That was just a sort of a co-worker guy that I did business with, and we used to spend hours a week together talking about all sorts of stuff. And he was a very modern, westernized style of guy, he thought. And on a philosophical level, he could definitely sound like he agreed, but he really didn't. And my point is that this is what you get from your partner, is that during the quiet, calm times where you're just discussing things philosophically and not specifically about your own relationships, you know, you'll get the impression from your partner that they're cool about all this stuff and they understand all this stuff and they're right into it. And then when it comes to really talking about real issues between you, you'll find that, you know, like this guy said, you know, she takes it personally and gets angry and gets upset, and, you know, they end up in the same loop that they started in. So we've got to remember this, that this is perfectly normal behaviour for the average Japanese person, and that we shouldn't be surprised by that. So a couple of things that will help, and this video is not going to be enough, no doubt. I'm expecting that after this video that I'll get another email from this guy, probably from some other people too, and we'll have to go to another video on this topic at least. But a couple of things that will help. One is Japanese people are really, really into timing. So they're amazingly patient and they're amazingly in tune with timing. You know how in a lot of our cultures, you can just change the topic, right? So if you're talking to your friend about surfing, but really you've got something else on your mind, you can just suddenly say, hey, look, mate, I'm really going to talk to you about this other thing, you know, and you can just change the topic, right? Start talking about something else. Japanese people wouldn't be comfortable with that usually. Usually their timing is very good. They wait until it's the right time to talk about something. And so if you're going to attempt to talk about something, then you really have to do this. You can't just walk in the door and say, right, let's talk about this. It probably won't work. The better thing to do is to wait till the timing's right. A couple of hints will be, it'll probably be a time when she's not busy. Sometimes in the car is not a bad time for these things. If you're in the car and neither of you is under stress and you're both sort of relaxed and happy and it's all pretty good, that can be a time to gently talk about things sometimes. But again, you've got to be careful because it could be seen that everything's cool and groovy and suddenly you're bringing up that bullshit again, right? So it is difficult to try and get the timing. But if you really want to talk about something, that's what you've got to do, is try and find the right timing. Quite often it's after people have eaten, and this goes for human beings in general. People are generally more mellow and relaxed after they've eaten. So after dinner or something like that, when everything's pretty mellow, is often a good time to talk about things, particularly if you've got kids in your house, because after dinner, once things settle, the kids are asleep and the wife's eaten and she's feeling relaxed, a little bit more relaxed and happy, and she's eaten. That's usually a time, males and females, all of us are usually more mellow after we've had dinner and we're a bit more relaxed, the kids have gone to sleep, that sort of thing. So if you're really going to talk about something, then you pick your timing, you know, pick a time when it's best for her, when she's going to be at her mellowest. And I keep saying her, assuming the non-Japanese person's male and the Japanese person's female, because usually that's the case. Most cases, most examples, that's the case. There are obviously exceptions to all this, but in most cases, this is what we're hearing, this is what we get, this is what we see. So that's the first one. If you are going to raise a topic, then choose your timing. However, the other piece of advice would be, is it really worth raising it? And quite often, you know, there's going to be some things you're just going to have to swallow. There's some things you're just going to have to accept, that you're just going to have to say, well, it's just the way it is, and just accept it. And choose your battles would be another piece of advice, where just choose which things you really, really need to talk about. Ask yourself, is talking about it with them going to help resolve it? Because quite often, it's just stuff that you just got to accept. You know, there might be something, particularly in raising the kids, that often brings up issues, because the Japanese way of raising kids is often different than the way of raising kids that most of the rest of us have experienced. And so there'll often be things like that you'll just have to accept. And that's often the better way to do it, is just to accept things that probably aren't going to change. And that's the other thing, is ask yourself first, is talking about this, is she going to be able to change this, or is she going to be able to see this differently or do it differently? And if the answer is no, don't even talk about it. Don't even talk about it. You really want to narrow it down. You really want to narrow down, because it always feels like you got 1,000 issues that you want to talk about, but you really got to narrow it down to the most important issues that you really think that talking about it is going to help you resolve. Because the ones that that won't change, or the ones that can't be resolved, or the ones that talking about it won't fix. Talking about them is a waste of time. So you really got to think about it long and hard first, and decide which things are really worth raising, and that if raising them is really going to make any difference. And then if it does, then choose your timing, and then try and get your timing right. Another thing that often works is the way it seems to work is that we've got to do our thing. That whatever it is about our relationship with the person, whatever they expect of us. And see, usually Japanese people have certain well, we all do. Human beings have expectations of their partners, and that the expectations usually of a Japanese wife is usually that the husband, goes to work and does his job and pays the bills, and they think a strong man. They usually see a strong man as being somebody who is calm and patient and kind and quiet and relaxed and confident and quiet, and that's usually the best way to behave. So if you have managed to get an idea across about something that concerns you or something you're not happy about, once you've done that, then just get into being relaxed, happy mode as much as you possibly can, and just be the best partner that you can be, because it's amazing how often this works. I've seen this in my own home, but I've also seen it in other relationships that I know of in Japan between non-Japanese people and Japanese people, and I've heard this comment before from guys that will have a talk with their partner about something. It seems to go nowhere, and then they go, oh well, and they get philosophical about it, and they just put their effort into just being a good hubby and doing their thing, going to work and paying the bills and being relaxed and happy and calm and cool and quiet. And then suddenly they find they get something back from the wife that they didn't think they were going to get. Now, one example is compassion. Usually non-Japanese people complain that their Japanese partner doesn't show them any compassion, and that's really typical, because in Japanese society there's not much compassion. Everybody just says gambare, 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 do your best, don't complain. So there's no real room for a lot of compassion in Japanese life. You don't just see it, you just don't see it. So expecting it from your Japanese partner is going to end in disappointment, and that's usually what we see, is it ends in disappointment because you just don't get it. However, you will find if you're quietly doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're being a good hubby, and going to work and paying the bills and being nice and being kind to her and gentle to her and relaxed and confident and quiet, and being, in the case of someone with kids, being good to the kids, looking after the kids and doing that sort of stuff. If you're doing all that, you might find then that she does come forward a couple of steps in your direction as far as being compassionate or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve there. That is often the case. The way the Japanese system see relationships, that it sort of obliges her. If you're being cool and groovy and doing all the right things, it sort of obliges her to be cool and groovy and to be nice to you too, right? That's the way the Japanese people see it usually. So that often works. With that too, being the cool and groovy thing, we've talked about this on previous videos. Any signs of jealousy or negativity at all, insecurity, any sort of those, any sort of reactions like that from you will really make things bad. You can't do that at all. You have to be quietly confident, even no matter how much you're suffering. And this is difficult because we most of us are used to relationships with friends and families and partners where we can be open about how we're feeling. But really with Japanese people, usually you can't. And there's to be honest, I don't know of any exceptions to this. When it really comes down to it, on the surface, you'll get people that get Japanese people that give you the impression of being cool about all this. And they'll tell you they're cool about it. And there might even be a Japanese person who pops up at the bottom of this video and says, that's not true of me. I'm in touch with my feelings, and there could well be, but I've never experienced them as friends or family members. We got a huge extended Japanese family, and you see it between them. you know, you see between them, if someone's weak in their relationship or something, there's no compassion. Everyone just says, "Gambare, gambare, gambare." You know, do your best, do your best, do your best, and that's their attitude. So hopefully this helps to that guy. Hopefully something that I've said in this video has hit a button for you and that has helped you, and hopefully applying some of these things might help. And please send me another email and let me know what, if anything's helped, and if there's any other concerns, and I'll make another video about this, because, you know, I'm concerned for this one person, but also, you know, for this one person who is telling me what's going on with himself, there's probably another 100 that aren't, you know, because this story is so common. Sadly, this story is really common, you know. So hopefully that helped somebody anyway. More videos coming soon.